He had everything: a mansion, power, and wealth, but when his daughter's horse became the target of his revenge, he crossed a line no one could ever imagine. His order to have the horse slaughtered was a cruel decision that would haunt him forever. But what happened next, no one saw coming. A horse, a family, and a secret that could destroy everything. Get ready for a story of betrayal, an unexpected hero, and a bond that refuses to break. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss a powerful story like this one. The storm raged outside Westbrook Mansion, its fury reflected in the chaos inside. Julian Westbrook stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of the stable, his jaw clenched, watching his daughter's most prized possession, Apollo, the magnificent stallion, grazing peacefully in the rain-soaked paddock. The horse, with its strong muscular frame and glossy chestnut coat, was a symbol of freedom and grace. But to Julian, Apollo had become a painful reminder of everything he had lost. Lily, his only child, had been through hell 2 months ago. A car accident had left her in critical condition, both physically and emotionally. She had fought her way back from the brink, but a part of her had never fully recovered. The accident had taken her mother, and Lily's heart was still wrapped up in the memory of that loss. For months, she had refused to leave the house, refusing to speak to anyone but Apollo. The horse had been a lifeline, a connection to her mother, and Julian could feel the growing distance between them with every passing day. Standing in the shadow of his multi-million-dollar empire, Julian had everything money could buy: wealth, power, success, but he felt powerless when it came to his daughter. The accident had shattered something inside her, and he couldn't fix it. Every time he tried, she pushed him further away, and Apollo, Lily's constant companion, was the barrier he couldn't break. Every day she spent in the stable, grooming and caring for the horse, was another day she wasn't trying to move forward. To Julian, it was as if she were holding on to a memory of a life that no longer existed, and that frustrated him more than anything. He had tried everything: therapy, trips, gifts, but nothing seemed to get through to her. His daughter was lost in her grief, and he couldn't bear to watch it any longer. With his mind clouded by frustration and a desire for control, Julian made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "He needs to go," Julian said. To Greg, his trusted assistant, without emotion, Greg, a man who had worked for Julian for years, stared at him for a long moment. He had seen Julian angry before, seen him make decisions without hesitation, but this was different. There was a cruelty in his eyes that unsettled Greg. "Are you sure, sir?" Greg asked, his voice steady but cautious. It's Lily's horse." Julian's gaze hardened. "It's her attachment to that damn horse that's keeping her stuck. She'll never heal as long as she clings to the past." "You don't understand, Greg. She's throwing away her life." Greg hesitated, his mind weighing the gravity of the request. But in the end, he knew there was no changing Julian's mind once it was made. "I'll arrange it," he said quietly. "It'll be done by morning." Julian nodded, his mind already elsewhere. His thoughts were consumed with visions of his daughter and her grief. This was the only way to break her from the past. As Greg left the room to make the call, Julian turned back toward the window. He could see the silhouette of Apollo in the distance, framed by the dark storm clouds above. The horse was beautiful, majestic, and strong, but at that moment, it felt like a symbol of everything Julian had lost: his wife, his daughter's happiness, and his peace of mind. He wanted to fix things and needed to fix things. And if sacrificing the horse was the only way to do it, so be it. But even as the thought passed through his mind, a strange feeling lingered, one he couldn't shake. It was a cold, gnawing doubt that crept up his spine. He had never been one to second-guess himself, but something about this felt wrong. A knot formed in his stomach as he glanced one last time at Apollo, who was now looking back at him with intelligent, unblinking eyes. Just as he turned to walk away, a faint sound broke the silence: the soft neigh of a horse, followed by the creaking of the stable door. Julian froze. It wasn't the sound of a horse resigned to its fate. No, it was the sound of panic. He rushed toward the door and threw it open, stepping into the downpour. The stable was eerily quiet, save for the heavy rain that lashed against the roof. And then he saw it. Apollo was moving restlessly in his stall, tossing his head as if sensing something was wrong. But that wasn't what caught Julian's attention. It was the figure standing at the edge of the stable, cloaked in the shadow of the overhanging barn roof. Lily. She was standing there, drenched to the bone, her eyes wide with horror as she stared at her father. "You," Julian started, his voice thick with shock. What are you doing here?" "I won't let you do it," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I won't let you hurt him." And in that moment, Julian realized something that shook him to the core. His daughter had known, and she was not going to let him destroy the one thing that meant more to her than anything. Lily's voice echoed in the cold night air, trembling with both fear and defiance. "I won't let you hurt him." Julian stood frozen, his mind racing. His daughter, his little girl, was standing in front of him, her soaked hair clinging to her pale face, her eyes wide with a mix of desperation and determination. It had been months since he had seen her so alive, so aware of the world around her. For so long, she had been a shell of the person she once was, lost in grief and memories. But now here she was, standing up to him, her hands shaking at her sides, ready to defend Apollo, the one thing that kept her tethered to the past. "You don't understand," Julian muttered, his voice strained. He felt the weight of the storm pressing in on him, both the one raging outside and the one inside. His heart, "This isn't about the horse, Lily, it's about you. You need to let go of this, of everything that keeps you trapped in the past." Lily shook her head. The motion was fierce and resolute. "You don't get it, do you? Apollo isn't just a horse. He's the last piece of mom I have left, and I'm not going to let you take that from me." Julian's breath hitched for a moment. His hardened exterior cracked, and the raw emotion in Lily's voice hit him like a physical blow. His daughter had lost so much: her mother, her sense of security, her peace, and now she was fighting for the last thread of that safety. But his mind, clouded by frustration, refused to relent. "This obsession is unhealthy," he snapped, his voice laced with a cold, calculated edge. "You're wasting your life holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore." Lily stepped forward, her face softening for just a moment before the fierce determination returned. "You can't just fix everything by throwing money at it, Dad. I'm not some project that you can fix with a check or a new thing. I need time, I need space, and I need Apollo." For a moment, Julian considered her words. He could feel the cold rain soaking through his suit, the chills in the air seeping into his bones. But none of that mattered. He was no longer thinking about the storm outside. He was thinking about Lily, about the hurt in her eyes, the pain that still clung to her like a second skin. "You're not thinking clearly," he said, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "You can't live in the past forever." Lily's eyes flashed with a mix of fury and sorrow. "And you think I can just forget her, forget Mom, forget the life we had? You've already taken everything else from me. Don't take this too." The words struck Julian like a punch to the gut. His pulse raced, and for a split second, the walls he had built around his heart seemed to crumble, exposing the guilt and regret he had buried deep within. He had tried so hard to protect Lily from the pain of losing her mother, but in the process, he had alienated her. He had pushed her away, not knowing how to heal her, not understanding what she needed from him. "Please," Lily's voice was barely a whisper now, but the raw emotion behind it cut through him. "Don't take him from me. I can't lose him too." And the words hung in the air between them, thick with the weight of years of grief, anger, and love. Julian's gaze shifted toward Apollo, who stood in the stable, his large, dark eyes reflecting the storm. The horse seemed to sense the tension, his ears flicking back and forth as if caught in the middle of something he didn't understand. For a brief moment, Julian questioned himself. Could he really go through with this? Could he really destroy the last connection his daughter had to the woman he had loved? But before he could voice his doubt, the sound of tires on gravel reached his ears. Greg. Julian's heart skipped a beat as he turned toward the driveway, his thoughts racing. Greg had likely already made the call. The hitmen would be on their way. The slaughter already arranged. "No," Lily shouted suddenly, her voice sharp with panic. "You can't. He's not some object for you to get rid of. You don't get to control everything. Julian's mind snapped back to reality. He was losing her to the grief he had tried to fight for so long. He had pushed her to this point, and now he was paying the price. You think I want to control everything? He asked, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and guilt. Do you think I wanted this? I just wanted you back. I wanted you to stop hurting, to stop holding on to something that wasn't real anymore. But it was too late. As the distant sound of approaching footsteps reached them both, Julian and Lily turned to face the stable's entrance, where Greg appeared in the rain, his face grave. He didn't need to say a word. His presence alone told them everything they needed to know. The horse's fate had already been sealed. But neither Julian nor Lily was prepared for what would happen next. The rain fell heavier now, as if the heavens themselves were mourning. What was about to happen? Julian's heart hammered in his chest as Greg approached with the somber expression of a man who had already carried out the task he had been assigned. Lily stood frozen, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if holding on to something far beyond just her own body. Her eyes never left Greg, not daring to look away. But her face betrayed the quiet storm of emotions running through her: desperation, rage, disbelief. Greg, Julian said, his voice cold and brittle, like a man who had already made a decision he couldn't take back. You've made sure everything's set, right? Greg nodded slowly, his face a mask of reluctance. It's done, sir, he said softly, his words like a dull thud in the air. The men are on their way. They'll take care of Apollo. Julian turned his back on Greg, his gaze fixed on Lily, who stood just feet away, trembling. She wasn't just crying, she was on the edge of breaking. He could see it, the rawness in her eyes, the tremor in her lips, the way her hands gripped her coat like it was the last thing tethering her to sanity. You can't do this, Lily said, her voice quivering but defiant. Please, Dad, don't do this to me. I don't care what you think. I need Apollo, and I need him now more than ever. Her voice cracked as she spoke, but there was fire in her eyes. Julian's pulse quickened, but it wasn't anger that surged in him now. It was guilt, deep, gnawing guilt. He had crossed a line somewhere in the fog of his anger and frustration. He had allowed himself to believe that by destroying the one thing Lily cared for, he could somehow fix everything, fix her, fix himself, and fix the damage that had been done. But he was wrong, so wrong. But it wasn't too late yet. Julian turned to Greg, his mind now spinning with the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. Stop it, he said, his voice rough. Call them back. Tell them it's off. This is wrong. I can't go through with it. Greg didn't move. The assistant simply stared at Julian for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You're sure about that, sir? Greg's voice was heavy with the weight of his words. The men are already on their way. You can't just— I don't care, Julian interrupted, his voice rising. He turned back to Lily, his hands shaking. I'm not doing this. I won't. Apollo stays. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Lily. Lily's eyes widened, the surprise evident in her tear-streaked face. She didn't speak for a moment, as though processing what her father had just said. The hope that flickered in her gaze was nearly enough to shatter Julian's resolve all over again. But then the sound of distant tires grew louder, and Lily's face faltered. Julian looked up to see a dark car pulling into the driveway, headlights cutting through the rain like knives. Greg's expression darkened. They're here, he said quietly, the words like an unwanted prophecy. No, Julian whispered, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. No, I won't let this happen. I'll stop it. Before Julian could finish, the car's engine cut off, and the door slammed. He watched in frozen disbelief as two men in dark raincoats stepped out of the car, their faces shadowed beneath hoods. Julian's mind went into overdrive, but he didn't move. He couldn't. This wasn't supposed to happen, not like this. The men approached, their boots crunching against the gravel as they neared the stable. One of them was holding a heavy tool bag, the faint outline of a rifle visible under his coat. No, Lily whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. But there was no denying the fear in her voice. Julian's entire body trembled as the two men approached the stable door. This was real. This was happening. And for the first time, Julian understood the depth of what he was about to lose, not just the horse, but his daughter, her trust, her love, and her faith in him. But before the men could reach the stall where Apollo stood, Julian moved. His legs carried him faster than he had ever run. "Stop," he shouted, his voice raw and desperate. "Stop. You can't." The men froze, staring at him as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Julian stood there, panting, his heart in his throat. "I said stop," he repeated, louder now, his hands shaking. Lily moved slowly toward him, her eyes locked on his. She seemed so small in the rain, standing against the storm both outside and within. But she wasn't afraid anymore, not of him. "You're making a mistake, Dad," she said softly. "You're making a huge mistake." The words cut through him like a blade. He turned to the two men, his voice trembling but firm. "You can't do it. I'm canceling the order. The horse is staying. Do you hear me? It's staying." The men exchanged a look of confusion on their faces. The one holding the rifle stepped forward. But Greg, who had been standing silently in the background, raised a hand to stop him. "Mr. Westbrook's decision is final," Greg said. "It's over." The men stood still for a moment, then slowly backed away, retreating to their car without a word. As the car pulled away, Julian collapsed to his knees, his breath ragged, his body shaking as if the storm inside him had finally been released. Lily was by his side in an instant, her arms around him. They sat there in the rain, the world around them still quiet and broken, and for the first time in months, Julian felt like he was finally ready to rebuild not his empire, not his wealth, but the bond with his daughter. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start healing. The morning after the storm had passed, the Westbrook mansion was eerily quiet. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy, like the earth was holding its breath. Inside, Julian sat in his study, staring blankly at the papers scattered across his desk. His mind was far from the numbers, contracts, and emails that usually consumed him. Instead, his thoughts were with Lily, with Apollo, and with everything that had nearly fallen apart the night before. He could still see her face, the shock, the anger, the hurt as she watched him call off the order. But there had been something else in her eyes, something he couldn't quite put into words. Relief, hope, and maybe even a tiny spark of trust. But that spark felt fragile to fragile. The knock on the door startled him. "Come in," he called, his voice low and hoarse from the emotions he'd been trying to bury since the night before. It was Greg, looking as calm and composed as ever. But Julian could see the tension in his posture, the same tension that had been in his own muscles all night, the tightness that hadn't loosened since he'd made the decision to stop the sacrifice. "I've spoken to the men," Greg said, his tone neutral. "They're not happy about being called off, but they understand the change in order. I've also taken care of the paperwork for the private security we discussed, just in case." Julian didn't reply right away. He was too lost in his own thoughts to focus on business. The cost of the horse, the security, the secrecy, it all seemed so trivial now. None of it mattered in the face of what he had nearly done to his daughter. "I'm sure you've already noticed, but things aren't exactly stable," Greg continued, his voice carrying a hint of concern. "Your relationship with Lily, it's fragile. She may never forgive you for what you tried to do. I'm just saying, sir, there's still a lot of ground to make up." Julian's heart sank. He had been so focused on controlling everything, on fixing the wreckage of his own life, that he hadn't stopped to consider how deep the wound had cut. Greg's words hit home harder than he cared to admit. "I know," Julian muttered. "I thought I was helping her. I thought I was fixing things, but I was wrong." Greg's gaze softened just for a moment. "You can still fix it, sir, but it's going to take time, a lot of time." The words were a reminder of something Julian didn't want to hear. Time was something he had never been good at giving, especially to people. He was used to making quick, decisive decisions, not waiting for the slow, painful process of healing. "Thanks, Greg," Julian said, his voice distant. "You can leave now." Greg gave a short nod and walked out of the room, leaving Julian alone with his thoughts once again. He stared out the window for what felt like hours, watching the lush greenery of the estate sway in the breeze. The sound of the wind through the trees was soothing, almost comforting. But there was no peace for him, no comfort in the beauty around him. He had shattered something important. He had broken his daughter's trust, and no amount of money, no amount of control, could fix that. Lily hadn't come to speak to him yet after the events of the previous night. Julian had expected some kind of confrontation, some kind of breakdown or emotional outpouring. But there was nothing, just silence. He knew she was in the stables, tending to Apollo. But every time he tried to go to her to apologize, the words stuck in his throat. He didn't know how to approach her, how to make things right. He had been so blind to her pain that now, even with everything in him, he couldn't figure out how to heal the rift between them. But then, as he paced the hallway, his thoughts interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps. He stopped. He didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Lily, Dad, she said finally, her voice quieter than usual, almost distant. We need to talk. Julian nodded, his throat tight. I know. I owe you an apology. I was wrong. I made a terrible mistake. Lily didn't respond right away. Instead, she simply stood there, her arms folded, her eyes fixed on the ground. When she finally looked up at him, there was no anger, no fury in her expression, just a quiet sadness. You don't get it, do you? She asked softly. It wasn't just about Apollo. It was about everything. You didn't even try to understand what I needed or what I've been through. Her words hit Julian like a wave crashing over him. The truth was raw and unrelenting, and it made him feel smaller than he ever had in his life. I tried, he said, his voice breaking. I thought I was helping you. I thought if I could take away the one thing that was keeping you from moving on. You can't just take things away and expect me to heal, Lily interrupted, her voice rising but not with anger, just with frustration. You can't just fix it by controlling everything around you. I've lost enough. You can't take this too. The words struck Julian like a punch to the gut. His pulse raced, and for a split second, the walls he had built around his heart seemed to crumble, exposing the guilt and regret he had buried deep within. He had tried so hard to protect Lily from the pain of losing her mother, but in the process, he had alienated her. He had pushed her away, not knowing how to heal her, not understanding what she needed from him. Please, Lily's voice was barely a whisper now, but the raw emotion behind it cut through him. Don't take him from me. I can't lose him, too. And the words hung in the air between them, thick with the weight of years of grief, anger, and love. Julian's gaze shifted toward Apollo, who stood in the stable, his large, dark eyes reflecting the storm. The horse seemed to sense the tension, his ears flicking back and forth as if caught in the middle of something he didn't understand. For a brief moment, Julian questioned himself. Could he really go through with this? Could he really destroy the last connection his daughter had to the woman he had loved? But before he could voice his doubt, the sound of tires on gravel reached his ears. Greg. Julian's heart skipped a beat as he turned toward the driveway, his thoughts racing. Greg had likely already made the call. The hitman would be on their way. The slaughter was already arranged. No. Julian whispered, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. No, I won't let this happen. I'll stop it. Before Julian could finish, the car's engine cut off, and the door slammed. He watched in frozen disbelief as two men in dark raincoats stepped out of the car, their faces shadowed beneath hoods. Julian's mind went into overdrive, but he didn't move. He couldn't. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. The men approached, their boots crunching against the gravel as they neared the stable. One of them was holding a heavy tool bag, the faint outline of a rifle visible under his coat. No, Lily whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. But there was no denying the fear in her voice. Julian's entire body trembled as the two men approached the stable door. This was real. This was happening. And for the first time, Julian understood the depth of what he was about to lose, not just the horse, but his daughter, her trust, her love, and her faith in him. But before the men could reach the stall where Apollo stood, Julian moved. His legs carried him faster than he had ever run. Stop, he shouted, his voice raw and desperate. Stop. You can't. The men froze, staring at him as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Julian stood there, panting, his heart in his throat. I said stop. He repeated, louder now, his hands shaking. Lily moved slowly toward him, her eyes locked on his. She seemed so small in the rain, standing against the storm both outside and within. But she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him. You're making a mistake, Dad, she said softly. You're making a huge mistake. The words cut through him like a blade. He turned to the two men, his voice trembling but firm. You can't do it. I'm canceling the order. The horse is staying. Do you hear me? It's staying. The men exchanged a look of confusion on their faces. The one holding the rifle stepped forward, but Greg, who had been standing silently in the background, raised a hand to stop him. Mr. Westbrook's decision is final, Greg said. It's over. The men stood still for a moment, then slowly backed away, retreating to their car without a word. As the car pulled away, Julian collapsed to his knees, his breath ragged, his body shaking as if the storm inside him had finally been released. Lily was by his side in an instant, her arms around him. They sat there in the rain, the world around them still quiet and broken, and for the first time in months, Julian felt like he was finally ready to rebuild not his empire, not his wealth, but the bond with his daughter. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start healing. The days after Julian's promise were slow, a kind of painful rebuilding. The house, once filled with the noise of constant business and servants running errands, now echoed with silence. But it wasn't the quiet of peace, it was the stillness of uncertainty. Every word Julian spoke to Lily felt weighted, every gesture filled with unspoken meaning. There was no easy fix for the years of distance, for the mistake he had made. But he was trying, that much was clear. Apollo had been kept safely in the stables, a constant reminder of the fragility of their family. Julian spent his mornings sitting in the large, plush office chair, hands folded, staring out over the estate. His eyes would occasionally flicker over to the barn where Lily was. She still refused to speak much to him, but she was spending more time with Apollo, brushing him, feeding him, and whispering to him as if the horse were her only friend. But nothing felt right. The weight of the past few days was like a storm cloud hovering just above him, always threatening to break. And, in the back of his mind, the shadow of that dark deal made in a fit of rage still loomed. That evening, the house was still. Julian had finally convinced Lily to join him for dinner. She was reluctant at first, but he had promised to make her favorite steak, mashed potatoes, and a simple salad. They ate in silence, the only sound coming from the gentle clinking of silverware on porcelain. Julian watched her, her movements precise but distant. She didn't look at him much, and he could tell her mind wasn't with him. It was with Apollo. Always with Apollo. You've been spending a lot of time with him, Julian finally said. Breaking the silence, Lily looked up from her plate, her eyes guarded. He's the only one who understands me, she replied softly, her voice thick with emotion. You think I didn't notice what you almost did, what you almost let happen. You think that was just about the horse. Her words stung each one as a sharp reminder of his failure. Julian set his fork down, his throat tight. Lily, I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know I can't take back what happened, but please believe me when I say I'm trying. I'm trying to fix this, to fix me. You can't fix me, Dad, Lily said, her eyes flicking to the window. I don't need fixing. What I need is trust. I need you to trust me for once. Julian's chest tightened at her words. Trust. It had been so easy to take control of everything around him, to micromanage, to solve problems with his wealth and power. But trust was something that couldn't be bought, something that couldn't be manipulated into existence. It was something he had never truly learned to give. I know, he said softly, and I'm sorry. I'll prove it to you. I will. Lily didn't respond, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, hope, perhaps. But it was faint, and Julian wasn't sure it would last. Later that night, after the table was cleared and the dishes washed, Julian couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. His mind drifted back to the phone call he had received earlier that afternoon. The call had come from his lawyer. There was news. Someone had learned of the failed attempt to have Apollo taken care of. And now that knowledge was out in the open, the threat wasn't just from the men Greg had hired. It was someone within his own circle, someone who had been close enough to hear whispers of the plan, close enough to use the information against him. At first, Julian had tried to shrug it off. It was a leak, surely, but the more he thought about it, the more his heart raced. This wasn't just a small problem, it was a threat to everything: his company, his wealth, and his reputation. As Julian paced around his study, the weight of it all pressed down on him. He couldn't let the truth about Apollo's near fake it out, not now, not ever. But there was no denying it anymore. The reckoning he had been avoiding was coming. His phone rang again, shattering his thoughts. Julian's hands were shaking as he picked up the receiver. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar but calm, almost too calm. "Mr. Westbrook," the voice said, "I hope you're sitting down. I think you should know that the details of your recent transactions have come to light, and unless we come to an understanding, I can't guarantee what might happen next." The voice trailed off, and Julian's blood ran cold. "You wouldn't," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You wouldn't dare." A soft chuckle echoed through the line. "Don't be so sure. You've made a lot of enemies, Mr. Westbrook, and I have a feeling your daughter's precious horse is just the beginning." The line went dead, and Julian was left staring at the phone, his mind reeling. His worst fears had come true. The deal, his desperate act of control, hadn't just been about his daughter. It had made him enemies in places he couldn't even begin to understand. The next morning, Julian drove out to the estate in a state of near panic. He had to fix this. He had to protect Lily. He had to protect Apollo. And most of all, he had to make sure nothing could tear his family apart. When he arrived at the stables, the first thing he noticed was the emptiness, the silence. Apollo wasn't in the stable. Lily was nowhere in sight. His heart skipped a beat. The panic swelled in his chest. Where was she? Where was Apollo? He ran through the stable doors, only to stop dead in his tracks when he saw the faintest imprint in the mud outside, the shape of hooves fading in the distance. And that's when it hit him. They were gone. The sun was setting over the estate, casting long shadows across the sprawling grounds. Julian stood on the porch of the Westbrook mansion, his mind a whirl of anxiety and panic. His hands were trembling as he tried to focus, as if the world had tilted just enough to make everything seem out of reach. Apollo was gone, Lily was gone, and the empty space left behind felt like an open wound, raw and bleeding. He had never truly realized how far he had pushed his daughter until now, until she had disappeared with the one thing in this world that meant more to her than anything: her horse. The horse he had almost sacrificed for the sake of his own misguided vengeance. Julian's heart raced as his thoughts swirled, trying to form a plan. He couldn't just let her go. He couldn't lose her like this. But in the back of his mind, he knew something darker was at play. It wasn't just about Apollo. This was about control. And someone powerful had manipulated him into this mess. The sound of a vehicle approaching broke his thoughts. He turned, his eyes narrowing as he saw Greg's truck pull up the long driveway. The man had been a constant in his life for years, a source of stability, someone Julian trusted implicitly. But after everything that had happened, after the threats and the lies, Julian couldn't shake the feeling that even Greg might not be on his side anymore. Greg stepped out of the truck, his face grim. There was no smile, no greeting, just business. "Julian," Greg said, his voice low, "we need to talk." "Where is she, Greg?" Julian demanded, his voice harsh with fear. "Where's Lily? Where's Apollo?" Greg hesitated, looking away for a brief moment. "I don't know where they are," he said slowly, "but I've got some information that might help. I didn't want to say anything before, but now, well, now it's too big to ignore." Julian's chest tightened. "What do you mean? Who's behind this? Who knows about the deal?" Greg hesitated, a moment of conflict crossing his face. Then he stepped forward, lowering his voice even further. "It's not just a leak, Julian. The person behind this is someone you trust, someone close to you, someone you trust, and if we don't move fast, they're going to make sure you lose everything." Julian felt the blood drain from his face. "What are you saying?" "The threat is bigger than you realize," Greg continued, his voice carrying a hint of concern. "Someone who knew about Apollo, about what you were planning to do, is using that knowledge against you. And if you don't act now, everything you've built will come crashing down." Julian shook his head in disbelief. He had trusted Greg with his life, his family, but now it felt like the ground beneath him was crumbling. "Who?" he whispered. "Who's behind this?" Greg's face darkened, and his eyes narrowed. "It's Richard Westbrook, your brother." The name hit Julian like a slap to the face. Richard, his older brother, the one person he had always kept at arm's length, the person whose ambition had always made Julian uneasy. Richard had been a shadow in the background for years, quiet, calculating, always watching. Julian had never fully trusted him. But this was a betrayal on a scale he couldn't have predicted. "Richard," Julian repeated, the name tasting bitter on his tongue. "He's been working against me this whole time." Greg nodded grimly. "He's been pulling strings for a while now. He knows everything about your business, about Lily, and about Apollo, and he's using it all against you. He's the one who leaked the information. He's the one who manipulated you into taking that extreme step with Apollo. And now he's using Lily as leverage to get what he wants." Julian's mind raced. He thought about all the times Richard had quietly stood on the sidelines, offering advice that always seemed too good to be true. Every time Julian had trusted him, every time he had let his guard down, Richard had been quietly gathering power, waiting for the right moment to strike. "I have to find her," Julian said, his voice thick with determination. "I can't let him win." "I'll help you," Greg said, his tone firm. "But you need to act fast. If Richard gets his hands on Apollo, or, worse, if he's using Lily as bait, there's no telling what he'll do." Julian didn't need to hear anymore. His heart pounded in his chest, and every muscle in his body was on alert. Richard had crossed a line, and Julian wouldn't let him tear his family apart. "We'll get him back," Julian said, more to himself than to Greg. "We'll get them both back." The search began in earnest that night. Julian and Greg scoured the estate, questioning everyone and checking every corner and every hiding place they could think of. But it wasn't until the early hours of the morning that they finally found a clue. A small handwritten note left on the desk in Julian's study. It was simple, but it sent a chill down his spine. "If you want to see them again, you'll come alone. The barn, midnight. Don't bring anyone else." Julian's hands trembled as he read the note. He didn't need Greg's confirmation. He knew exactly who had written it, Richard, and he knew exactly what he had to do. This was at the moment of reckoning. Julian stood staring at the note, his mind focused entirely on what lay ahead. There was no turning back now, no more mistakes. If he was going to save his daughter and his horse, he would have to confront the man who had spent his entire life plotting against him. And this time, he would not let Richard win. The barn was eerily quiet as Julian approached it under the pale light of the moon. The sound of his footsteps on the gravel was muffled, drowned out by the heavy thudding of his heart in his chest. The note had been clear. Come alone. No backup, no distractions. Richard wanted this to be personal. Julian paused just outside the barn doors, his mind a storm swirling with every possible outcome, every scenario. He had already lost so much: his daughter, his trust in his own decisions, and his relationship with Apollo. But he wasn't about to lose everything, not like this, not to Richard. He stepped into the barn, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The wooden beams creaked above him, and the scent of hay and fresh straw filled the air. In the far corner, silhouetted against the weak light, was Richard, standing like a figure from a nightmare. Julian's voice broke the silence. "It's over, Richard. Let them go." Richard turned slowly, a smirk playing at the edges of his lips. "Oh, Julian, always so predictable. You never did learn how to play the game." The two brothers stood facing each other, the years of resentment and rivalry between them now tangible, pressing down on Julian's shoulders like a weight he had always known. Richard was dangerous, but now, seeing him here so close, the full extent of his brother's malice was undeniable. "Why, Julian?" he asked, his voice strained. "Why destroy everything I've built? Why use Lily and Apollo to get back at me?" Richard's laugh echoed in the barn. "Destroy everything you've built? No, Julian. I'm not destroying anything. I'm taking what's rightfully mine. You always took everything: our father's company, our inheritance, even our mother's attention. It was always about you, wasn't it? Always about being the golden child. Well, now it's my turn. Julian's fists clenched. You think this is about power, about money. This is about family. You're tearing us apart. Richard took a step forward, his face hardening. I've waited long enough. I gave you every chance to hand over control of the company, to step aside. But you never did. You always had to be the one in charge. Now it's my turn to take it all. Julian's breath caught in his throat. Richard wasn't just after the company. He was after everything. And if he was willing to go this far, to use his own niece and Apollo as pawns, there was no telling what he might do next. Lily's voice suddenly cut through the tension. Dad. Stop. Julian's heart lurched in his chest. He spun around to see Lily, standing in the doorway, her face pale but determined. She was holding Apollo's reins, the horse standing beside her, looking calm as if he knew this moment would come. I told you not to bring anyone else, Richard hissed, his eyes flashing with anger. I don't care. Lily shot back, her voice steady despite the situation. You don't get to control us anymore. Julian felt a surge of relief and pride. His daughter had come for him, had come for them. Apollo, her protector, her anchor, stood at her side as strong and unwavering as ever. Richard took a step back, his eyes narrowing. You're making a mistake, Lily. You don't understand. This is how it has to be. No, Richard, Julian said, his voice firm, finally standing tall after years of being dominated by his brother's schemes. This is how it ends. There was a long, tense silence. The weight of everything, the years of manipulation, the broken trust, the pain of their family's fracture hung in the air. But as Julian looked at his daughter, standing strong, he knew that it wasn't too late to change everything. You won't win, Julian. Richard spat, taking one last look at them. I will make sure you regret this. I will make sure you regret this. With that, Richard turned and stormed out of the barn, leaving them in the stillness of the night. Lily ran to Julian, throwing her arms around him. He held her tightly, feeling the weight of everything they had just survived. The nightmare wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, Julian believed they might actually have a chance. He looked at Apollo, who nodded softly as if understanding the moment of triumph. You did it, Dad. Lily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. We did it. Julian nodded, his heart swelling with pride. No, Lily, you did it. You showed me what really matters, not power, not money, family. And for the first time in years, Julian understood. He had been blind, thinking that control and power would fix everything. But the truth was, it was love, trust, and loyalty that had the power to heal. They had fought together, they had won together, and as they stood there in the quiet barn, surrounded by the remnants of their fractured family, Julian finally understood what it meant to truly be a father. They were free for now, at least. If you were moved by this story of family, betrayal, and redemption, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that no matter how deep the betrayal, love and trust can always bring us back together. Stay tuned for more powerful stories like this one.